I'm a 31-year-old woman, and this all starts with the kind of dad who treated me like a temporary house guest in his life the moment my mom died. My parents were married for about 16 years before she passed away suddenly when I was 15. A terminal illness. It was fast. Brutal. Barely enough time to process what was happening before it was over. Less than a year later, my dad, Peter, was remarried to a woman he barely knew, and I was expected to be okay with it. Peter is now 60, retired early, or so he tells people. He grew up with this old-fashioned mindset that only sons deserve to carry on family wealth. He never said it outright to my face back then, but the way he handled everything made it clear. When it came time for me to apply to colleges, I got nothing from him, not a dollar. I was on my own. Meanwhile, his new wife brought a son into the marriage, Brady. He was 10 at the time. I didn't resent the kid, I barely knew him, but the way Peter suddenly turned into super dad was jarring. Paid for Brady's private high school, trade school later on, bought him a used but solid car, even took him on a guys only trip to Seattle. Meanwhile, I worked at a diner and a campus bookstore while pulling 18 credit hours a semester. I got through undergrad on a mix of scholarships and grinding every spare second. Law school was the same, more scholarships, more work. I kept my distance from Peter the whole time, just enough contact not to burn the bridge completely. I didn't want to need him, and luckily I didn't have to. After law school, I joined a small startup as their in-house legal, took stock options instead of a big salary, and when the company got acquired, I cashed out more than I ever thought possible at 27. With that money, I bought a duplex in a decent neighborhood outright. No mortgage, no strings. I remember showing it to Peter once, just trying to be civil. He looked around and said, "Not bad for a glorified apartment. Hope it doesn't lose value." That was the only thing he said. By that point, I'd learned to stop expecting basic respect. What I didn't know until later was that right after my mom died, Peter quietly transferred the title of her family's ancestral home to himself. That house had been in my maternal grandfather's name. I grew up there. It was meant to pass to me eventually. But when I was still underage and grieving, Peter used his status as the surviving spouse to move things around. It wasn't illegal technically, but it was dirty. I only found out through my maternal grandmother's old lawyer, who had kept tabs on everything after grandma passed. Peter kept that house, rented it out for income, and never mentioned any of it. Whenever we did talk, he acted like he'd built everything himself. No acknowledgement of where that property came from, whose name was originally on it, or how it was tied to my mom's side of the family, not his. We kept things civil but cold. He'd occasionally send holiday texts, sometimes ask vague questions about whether I was dating or thinking about settling down. Every time I answered like it was small talk with a neighbor. I never brought up the house. I waited. And then about 2 years ago, Peter came to me looking for help. He had gone into business with Brady, something to do with a restaurant. It flopped. They'd sunk most of Peter's savings into it. Now he was asking if I could lend him money to cover some debt. That word, lend, was a joke. There was no intention to repay it. Just a quiet expectation that I'd step up because I was doing well. I said no, not emotionally, not angrily, just no. He tried framing it as family obligation, like he'd done so much for me growing up. I reminded him I paid for every semester of school, every book, every meal. Then I walked away from the conversation and didn't return his calls. A few months later, I heard from a cousin that Peter was getting married again. This time to a woman named Lacey. She's 39, never been married before, no kids. I didn't know much about her, but Peter invited me to the wedding and said, "It would mean a lot to have you there." I agreed under one condition, that we meet in person to talk before the ceremony. He was confused, but agreed. The truth is, I wasn't going there to celebrate, and I was going to lay out some facts about that house and make it crystal clear that I wasn't going to let him pass off my mother's legacy to a stepson or a new wife like it meant nothing. If Lacey had no idea what was going on, she was going to find out, and if she did know, then she'd get to see just how serious I was. That lunch meeting was going to set the tone for everything that came next. I was done staying quiet. We met at this neutral little cafe Peter picked. Not fancy, but just nice enough to make him look like a peacemaker if anyone was watching. It had been over a year since I'd seen either of them. Lacey was already seated when I got there. She smiled quick, tried to seem warm. Peter stood up like he was greeting a VIP. It was all performance. He launched straight into small talk, how proud he was of how everyone was moving forward, how Lacey was excited to blend families, and how important unity was to both of them. Lacey nodded along. She started talking about how they were combining bank accounts, finalizing the will together, talking about investments and a shared future. She made it sound like they were building some kind of dynasty. Cancel Gim. I let her finish. Then I asked one question if she knew where Peter's house came from. She paused, confused, then said she assumed Peter bought it years ago. Mortgage paid off. Something about generational planning he'd mentioned. That was all I needed. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printed family tree and a full deed history that went back to my grandfather. The house had been in my mom's family for 2 generations before Peter transferred the title to himself. It had never been his to begin with. Peter didn't even try to deny it. He gave a lazy shrug and said it was his now. Then, like it was the most casual thing in the world, he mentioned his plan to leave the house to Brady. Said I was doing well for myself, and I'd get married someday and wouldn't need it. Lacey looked at him, then at the papers, then back at me. She stayed quiet, but I could tell this wasn't what she expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push the folder across the table. I just spoke clearly and directly. That house came from my mother's side. Peter had no right to erase that. As his only biological child, I wasn't going to sit quietly while he handed it off to someone with no connection to the legacy. And then I pulled out the second document, a prenup. It wasn't about Peter's personal money or Lacey's future earnings. It was narrowly written. The only thing it covered was the house and any assets tied to my mother's estate, past, present, or future. The terms were simple: if Peter died or they divorced, Lacey couldn't claim anything tied to my maternal line. It would protect the house from being contested or passed outside the family. Peter's whole mood changed in a second. He leaned back, scoffing, calling it overkill, said I was making a big deal out of nothing, and that I'd always been difficult. He accused me of trying to sabotage his happiness. That part was almost word for word what he texted me when I refused to give him money months earlier. Lacey didn't say much. She took the document and said she'd have her attorney look at it. No arguments, no emotional outburst. She just folded it up and tucked it in her purse. I laid down one condition. The prenup had to be signed and notarized before the wedding. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be attending. I said it once, directly, and left it there. No threats, no begging. Peter laughed in that fake way he always used when he felt like he was losing control of a situation. Tried changing the subject to family memories and Brady growing up. I didn't respond. I stood up, paid my part of the bill in cash, and walked out. No hugs, no goodbye, just done. By the time I got home, I already had a message from Peter sent before I blocked him, long, angry, and full of guilt tripping. I didn't open it. I just archived it and emailed the prenup to Lacey's lawyer directly, along with a PDF copy of the property deed and summary timeline. Everything timestamped, every fact laid out. That meeting wasn't for closure. It was a warning shot. I wasn't going to argue over what belonged to my mother. I wasn't going to let Peter gift it away, like a souvenir to someone who just showed up at the end of his life. And I definitely wasn't going to sit in a wedding pew smiling politely while he played patriarch with something he didn't build. I'd drawn my line. What happened next was up to them. The next morning, Peter used a new number to send a wall of text, paragraphs. It started off calling me ungrateful, moved into how I was sabotaging his happiness, and ended with something about how I'd always been difficult. I didn't reply. I just forwarded everything to my lawyer and deleted the message. That same morning, I sent a full legal summary of the house's origin to Lacey's attorney, timeline, deed records, family lineage, and a note that the prenup was non-negotiable. 2 days later, Lacey's lawyer replied with some clarification questions. Nothing aggressive, just standard legal stuff about wording and enforcement. I confirmed everything was firm and backed by documentation. A few days after that, one of my cousins from my mom's side called out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken in years. She told me she'd recently been at a dinner where Peter referred to Brady as the future of the family and described me as self-sufficient, saying I didn't need anything and had moved on. That phrase stuck, moved on. Like my mom's memory was something to box up and store away, just because I made a life for myself without his help. I asked her to check her old emails. She found one from about 6 years ago where Peter had written something almost word for word to her dad. Brady will inherit. Rachel doesn't need it. No fix needed here. Name is consistent. She forwarded it to me. That email changed everything. With that in hand, I worked with my attorney to open a formal probate review. There had been clauses in my mom's will that Peter bypassed when transferring the property. They weren't enforced because I was a minor at the time, and no one challenged the paperwork. Now we had legal cause to reopen everything. Peter started calling as soon as he found out. He left 2 voicemails telling me to stop digging into the past and making things ugly. I blocked his number after that. Every further message went straight to my lawyer. Not long after, Brady sent a DM. He used the same tired script, family unity, letting go, not everything being about money. I responded with one sentence, justice is not revenge. And then I blocked him too. A week later, Lacey's lawyer contacted mine to say she would sign the prenup. No edits, no conditions, just one request. It would be signed in a neutral location, in front of legal witnesses, not at the wedding. She didn't want drama in front of guests. I agreed. We scheduled the signing and made it clear that if the document wasn't notarized by that date, I would consider their marriage legally disconnected from anything tied to my family's legacy. No attendance, no gifts, no communication. The day before the signing, Peter's lawyer tried to delay the meeting, claimed there was a scheduling issue. My lawyer didn't bother arguing. She filed a notice of intent with the court to place a legal hold on any and all property transfers involving Peter's estate. That forced their hand. That same afternoon, I got a tip from a contact at the county clerk's office. Peter had tried to file a property transfer to Brady the week before, unaware that the freeze already in effect would nullify the attempt. It was blocked due to incomplete title documentation. The house was still under contested ownership because of the pending probate, and Peter's claim over it wasn't clean enough to process the transfer. We didn't waste time. My lawyer filed an injunction that evening. It was a quiet move, nothing flashy, no announcement, but it legally froze the house. No sales, no gifting, no refinancing, nothing. Until the probate review finished, the house couldn't legally move an inch. With everything filed and locked, I stepped back. No texts, no phone calls, no venting to friends. Just logged out, backed everything up, and waited. From that point on, the fight wasn't personal anymore. It wasn't about who got what or what Peter thought of me. It was about enforcing something that should have been respected from the start. The law was now in motion. Peter couldn't stop it. Lacey's attorney sent formal notice that she would sign the prenup as is, no edits. They requested a neutral third-party office for the signing, with a witness from both legal teams present. I replied with a date, time, and location. Everything was documented, and copies would be filed with both attorneys. No room for backtracking later. The following day, a family friend messaged me, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He claimed Peter was devastated and said I was making a scene over things that should have stayed private. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the message to my lawyer and had it added to the probate case record as an indirect attempt to influence ongoing legal matters. Around the same time, My late mother's cousin came forward with something stronger, a signed letter from over a decade ago, handwritten and dated. In it, Peter promised to honor the terms of my mother's will and keep the ancestral home in my name once I turned 25. The cousin had held onto it in case things ever got complicated. It wasn't legally binding by itself, but it backed everything else we were building. My lawyer used that along with the property records, Peter's past email, and the title dispute to open a full probate re-examination. We filed for breach of fiduciary duty and suppression of estate documents. That gave us ground to ask the court to block Peter from moving any property until the review was complete. While that was happening, we pulled Peter's current will through court channels. Every asset, including the house, was listed for Brady. Nothing for me. Not even a token amount. Just a note that I was independently stable. We found out Peter had already tried to transfer the house title to Brady a month earlier, but the transaction failed. Because of the open injunction and the fact that the title was legally contested, the transfer couldn't be finalized. He hadn't expected the roadblock. Then one evening, he showed up outside my house despite being blocked, which made me consider a restraining order. Pulled up in his car and started shouting from the curb about betrayal, loyalty, and how I was killing the family. I didn't respond. I called my lawyer and security company immediately. They flagged the incident and added it to our legal response. His number was permanently blocked on all devices after that. I also upgraded my home security, just to be safe. The next day, my legal team finalized the injunction paperwork. We submitted a motion to freeze Peter's ability to sell, gift, refinance, or otherwise touch the disputed property. The judge reviewed the motion and granted a preliminary freeze. Nothing tied to the estate could move, not even to Brady, until the full investigation played out. We didn't stop there. I started preparing the next step, documentation to formally request executor control of my mother's estate if the court sided in my favor. The paperwork included financial audits, will clauses, family affidavits, and historical proof of ownership. Peter was now locked out of his own chessboard. Every move he'd tried to make had either failed or was being unraveled in court filings. The house was frozen, the prenup was signed, and the paper trail was catching up to him fast. I didn't go to the rehearsal dinner. Peter used that as an opening. He told everyone I was being spiteful, that I was trying to ruin the wedding out of jealousy or bitterness. By the next morning, 3 distant relatives forwarded me photos and messages from the event. Peter had spent most of his speech talking about how difficult I'd always been and how grateful he was to finally have a real family around him. I had my lawyer send him a formal cease and desist. The letter demanded he stop misrepresenting the facts of an active legal case to third parties. It also warned that any further defamation could be used as evidence in court. We sent copies to his lawyer and Lacey's as well, just to make sure it couldn't be ignored. On the wedding day, I showed up only briefly. I wasn't there to celebrate, I came to deliver the signed and notarized copy of the prenup. It was handed directly to Peter and his attorney outside the venue, with both legal teams on record confirming the handoff. I didn't step inside. I didn't stay for photos. I turned around and left. Word started spreading inside fast. A few guests overheard enough to start whispering, and soon people were talking about legal issues tied to Peter's estate. Someone mentioned property freezes, and it didn't take long before people were connecting dots. Lacey's side of the family started asking quiet questions. Some of them pulled her aside. Her posture changed through the whole ceremony, rigid, quiet, and distant, but she still went through with it. Peter's new in-laws looked tense throughout. By the end of the reception, several of them had already left early. Nobody wanted to get pulled into something messy. As an in. While that was unfolding, I got an update from my lawyer. The court had officially accepted our injunction filing and placed it on the probate review calendar, and we now had a formal hearing date. That gave us enough standing to request access to more financial disclosures. Outside the venue, Brady caught me near the valet. He stepped in front of me, accusing me of being vengeful and saying none of this would bring my mom back. I didn't respond. I didn't even slow down. I walked past him and left. Later that evening, Lacey texted me from a number I hadn't blocked. Just one line I signed. I understand now. Thank you for standing firm. I screenshotted the message and forwarded it to my lawyer for the case file. A few days after the wedding, Peter's attorney filed an objection to the injunction. Their claim was that my legal filings were harassment, and that I was using the court system to cause personal damage. It didn't hold. The paperwork, the will copies, the block title transfer, there was too much to dismiss. My legal team responded by filing for an emergency hearing to secure full access to Peter's property transaction history. That same week, we uncovered something new. Peter had tried to leverage a few minor assets tied to his own late parents, pulling cash out right before the freeze kicked in. He needed liquidity fast and was trying to beat the clock. We flagged the activity and submitted a request for immediate disclosure of all current holdings and recent transfers. The court approved the motion. We were in. The date for the hearing was confirmed. I started working with my team to build a complete historical audit, every document, transaction, missed clause, and inheritance decision Peter had made since my mom's death. This time, it wouldn't just be a property dispute. It would be a full accounting. The hearing started late. Peter walked in 10 minutes after the scheduled time, unshaved, suit wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He wasn't carrying anything. No briefcase, no folder, no prepared documents. Just a notepad and a half-empty coffee. His lawyer looked tense. Lacey sat at the back, silent, next to her own attorney. No eye contact between them. My team was ready. We submitted the deed history, the mishandled will, the email Peter wrote years ago, calling me self-sufficient, and the signed affidavit from my mother's cousin. Everything was labeled, tabbed, and certified. My lawyer walked the court through a timeline showing how Peter had bypassed estate clauses, transferred property to himself, and attempted to shift assets to Brady while pretending the house was always his. The judge reviewed the files and extended the freeze on Peter's property transactions for 60 more days, citing the volume of evidence and procedural fairness, though such decisions usually take longer. It gave us time to complete the deeper financial audit. Peter tried to interrupt twice, but each time the judge reminded him he would have his turn if he submitted proper documentation, which he hadn't. While pulling older estate records, my lawyer found something unexpected. Years ago, Peter had submitted an application to access a trust fund that had been set aside by my mom. It was meant for me alone. The application was denied because of a clause my mom had inserted before she died. Peter had no authority over it. The fund had already matured and been rolled into another account, which helped me through law school. He tried to claim it after I moved out, quietly, and failed. That discovery added weight to our claim that Peter had a pattern of trying to claim assets meant for others. Then came the biggest issue. Peter had refinanced the family home years ago. Not just once, but twice. He used inflated valuations to pull out equity and sunk most of the money into the restaurant business with Brady. The mortgage was now months from default. The house wasn't just in legal limbo, it was financially unstable. He hadn't disclosed this to anyone. We filed a second motion to investigate the refinancing for misrepresentation and improper use of collateral. If the mortgage had been issued based on false information, the lender could be pulled into the case. That motion was accepted for review immediately. Brady was nowhere to be seen. He had stopped responding to Peter weeks earlier and officially withdrew from all legal matters. No statements, no filings, just silence. A few days after the hearing, I received notice that Peter had attempted to file paperwork to designate a new beneficiary on a separate rental property. The title office blocked it automatically because of the court's existing freeze. Every move he tried to make now triggered a review. At this point, my team began preparing to assert my position as co-beneficiary of my maternal estate. With the newly authenticated documents and multiple affidavits, we could formally argue that Peter's control had been invalid from the start. Lacey, through her lawyer, requested a meeting with me. She wanted clarity on her exposure, financial, legal, everything. I agreed to meet, but set one rule in writing. The conversation would be legal only. No personal reconciliation, no emotional appeals. The meeting was short. Lacey asked direct questions about the house, the prenup, and what the freeze meant for her. My lawyer explained that since she signed the prenup, she was protected from liability tied to my mother's assets. She nodded, took notes, and left without any further contact. With the court tracking every move, Peter's ability to control anything tied to the estate was functionally over. Every transaction required approval. Every request triggered scrutiny. For the first time, it wasn't just my word against his. Now it was paper, law, and history lining up against him. We met in a neutral office, just me, Lacey, and our lawyers. Everything was recorded and kept formal. Lacey admitted that Peter never told her the real history of the house. He'd made it seem like it was something he bought on his own, clean and simple. She only found out the full story when the court filings started coming through. She also revealed that after the wedding, Peter pressured her to sign a new will. The draft gave her lifetime residence rights to the house, something her lawyer immediately flagged as unenforceable, given the ongoing injunction. I confirmed it would have been a direct violation of the court order and could trigger legal consequences. Then she said creditors had started reaching out to her. Peter had no stable income left. The restaurant had failed, the mortgage was in default, and all of his remaining assets were frozen. She asked for a copy of the refinance documents. I gave her the full file, 2 rounds of inflated appraisals, both tied to equity that had since lost much of its value. With the prenup protecting her, Lacey chose to leave the marriage. Quiet exit, no announcement. She moved out 2 days later, took her belongings, and cut contact. The probate case wrapped shortly after. The judge granted me full executor rights over my maternal estate. That included control of the house. My legal team filed paperwork to retitle it under the joint estate, as it should have been years ago. With the mortgage in default, I began foreclosure proceedings immediately. Peter was served with an eviction notice. There was no legal fight. His attorney filed a withdrawal of representation citing non-payment and lack of cooperation. Peter didn't respond to the eviction. On the final deadline, my representative and a locksmith arrived at the property. The locks were changed. The house was empty. Peter wasn't there. Brady had already disappeared. He'd removed himself from all legal responsibility and quietly relocated. No forwarding address, no contact. Lacey returned to her previous city and job. She asked to be removed from any future communication involving Peter's affairs. We agreed through our lawyers. I started restoration on the house. Nothing major, just repairs and cleanup. One change I made was at the entryway. I added a small, tasteful plaque. Just a name and a year. My mother's name. The woman who grew up in that house protected it in her will and was erased by the man who claimed to love her. He doesn't get to rewrite the story anymore.